I am Claire Strader, the Small Scale and Organic Produce Educator for UW Extension Dane County and the Fair Share CSA Coalition. I have been using cover crops on the farm scale since 1993 and on the garden scale since 2011. Cover crops are my most favorite topic, and I am very happy to be able to talk with you about them today. First, I want to cover what a cover crop is. It is grown primarily for the benefit of the soil and is not generally harvested or eaten itself, but maintains or improves the soil for future harvestable crops. A cover crop might be referred to as a green manure when it is grown specifically to increase nitrogen in the soil, and it's also sometimes called a catch crop when it is grown specifically to take up leftover nutrients and to prevent those nutrients from running off. There are multiple benefits of cover crops. One of the primary benefits is that they can hold the soil in place over winter, between successions of vegetable crops, or whenever the soil might otherwise be bare. Bare soil is highly vulnerable to erosion, both by wind and water. Cover crops are not the only way to keep soil covered. Mulch and row cover can also serve that function in specific situations, but cover crops are an important option because of the additional benefits they bring. These photos show cover crops in the fall and spring when vegetable crops are not occupying very much of the land. The photo on the right shows a farm field where clover, rye, vetch, and other covers are filling in following harvest. You can also see some late season brassicas in the upper right corner. The photo on the left shows cover crops in the spring garden between early seeded vegetable crops. Some of the cover crops in this photo were planted in the fall, before, and some were planted as soon as the ground could be worked in March, after winter mulch was removed. The channels that cover crop roots create in the soil also make it easier for water to infiltrate and reduce the likelihood that it will run off, taking precious soil with it. This increased water infiltration is especially helpful in big storm events where a great deal of rain comes down at one time. Once that water has infiltrated the soil, it is available to the plants. Soil organic matter is an essential component of soil health and serves several functions in the soil, including improving soil structure and making a range of nutrients available to the plant. Cover crops add organic matter because all the plant material in the cover crop, both above and below ground, stays in place and is digested into soil organic matter. The more biomass the cover crop produces, the more potential it has to increase soil organic matter. The photo on the left shows sorghum Sudan grass that was planted in early June. There is a yardstick in the center of the photo to give you an idea of the height of the crop. As you can see, it has produced a huge amount of biomass in less than 3 months. Legumes are an important type of cover crop. Legumes are plants that can fix nitrogen from the air. Technically, it is the specific soil bacteria called rhizobia living on the roots of the legumes that fix the nitrogen. These bacteria create nodules where the nitrogen is pulled from the atmosphere and made available to the plant. The plant simply gives the rhizobia some carbon in exchange for the nitrogen. When legumes are worked into the soil, the nitrogen in those nodules is made available to subsequent crops. Legumes are unique in that they are the only type of plant that can add this important nutrient to the soil. Leguminous cover crops are especially unique because all the nitrogen fixed by the green manure is returned to the soil instead of leaving the plant in the form of a harvest of peas or beans, for example. These photos show nitrogen nodules in the roots of a pea cover crop. Some cover crops are especially good at reducing weeds. Weed seeds that are shaded and crowded by other plants are less likely to germinate. And even when they do germinate, they are much less likely to grow into mature plants that can produce many seeds. Instead, they tend to be stunted, as they are less able to compete for the sunlight, water, and nutrients that all plants need to grow. Cover crops that grow quickly and create lots of biomass are especially good at denying weeds access to those resources. The sorghum Sudan grass that we saw earlier is especially good at weed suppression, as are buckwheat and rye. The photo on the left shows buckwheat being used to kill my front lawn in preparation for creating a vegetable garden. The process started on April 15th when I tilled in the grass and weeds and planted a crop of oats. I followed the oats with 2 successions of buckwheat. The photo on the right was taken in August after the beds were formed and planted to fall crops. The process worked wonderfully and killed the lawn completely. Finally, cover crops can provide habitat and food for beneficial insects in the garden. Pollinators are attracted to flowers on crops like clover and buckwheat. These flowers can also provide food for beneficial insects that prey on or reproduce on pest crops. Even cover crops that do not flower can provide habitat for spiders, mites, and other insects that hunt crop pests. One of the reasons I have most enjoyed growing cover crops is because of the beauty they bring to the garden. Covers can be very striking, especially at times of year when vegetable crops do not have much to show for themselves. While there are many benefits of cover crops, there are also some important challenges. The first, and perhaps most obvious, is that it can be difficult to find both physical and temporal niches for them. Most of us like to fill our gardens with vegetables or flowers and do not want to take beds out of production just to grow cover crops. Even so, with a little planning, it is possible to fit them in and among our main season plans. For instance, onions are usually planted in mid-April and harvested in late July. If you plan ahead to seed a cover crop in that bed immediately after harvest and choose something like buckwheat, the cover can be worked in and followed by a fall crop like spinach or salad. Or you can choose something that will stay in place all fall, winter, and even spring. Hairy vetch, for instance, will overwinter and fix nitrogen throughout the fall and spring, creating an excellent planting bed for tomatoes or melons or another warm season nitrogen-loving crop in the following year. The post-onion niche is pretty easy to identify. A more difficult niche might be in early spring. While crops like onions and broccoli can be planted in April as soon as the ground can be worked, warm season crops like peppers and cucumbers have to wait until late May when temperatures become more moderate. In those cases, oats and peas can be planted to keep the soil active, prevent weeds, and add nitrogen before the main season crop. Creating a planting calendar and garden map as pictured here is useful for many reasons. Planning for cover crops in this way is only one. Sourcing seed for the garden scale can be difficult. Finding the right species in the right quantity and at the right price is tricky, especially if you are trying to find everything you need from one supplier. Check with multiple suppliers to find the best fit for you. Vegetable seed companies like Johnny's Select Seed, Fedco, and High Mowing all carry cover crop seed in quantities useful for the garden scale. Larger suppliers like Welchers and Albert Lee have larger minimum volumes and better prices. Gardeners can make use of those suppliers by going in on orders together. As cover crops become more popular, local garden centers are also carrying some limited selection of cover crop seeds. The challenge of killing a cover crop is often underestimated. Before planting a cover, it is important to know how you are going to kill it. Each of these termination techniques has benefits and drawbacks. I have listed them in my order of preference when working on the garden scale. The easiest way to kill a cover crop is to choose one that will die on its own. The photo on the top right shows a bed of oats and peas that was planted in the fall and died over the winter, leaving a nice spring mulch. In some cases, it can be good to have a cover that will survive the winter and continue to grow in the spring. If you choose one of those covers, you will have to use one of the other techniques to kill it. Hairy vetch is my favorite winter hardy cover crop. It will die after being pulled up and lightly forked. The photo on the far left shows me cutting down a crop of rye and vetch in the late spring. Because rye is so fibrous and difficult to kill, this step must be followed by forking the remaining roots over into the bed, which in the case of rye is quite a bit of work. In this situation, tillage would be easier than forking. The photo on the lower right shows a tractor-drawn tiller. There are also walk-behind tillers that are more appropriate for the garden scale. While tillage might be an obvious and easy choice if you have the right equipment, it is at the bottom of my list because of the way it disturbs soil layers and channels. One of the most important components of maintaining soil health in my garden is to reduce soil disturbance and compaction as much as possible. The channels and air pockets in soil are essential for plant health. They allow for root growth and nutrient absorption and are easily destroyed by tillage. That said, when converting a large space to garden and using cover crops to kill weeds and prepare the soil, a tiller is a wonderful tool. After that work is done and the beds are established, however, it is best to sell the tiller and move on to more gentle termination techniques. One termination option that is not listed here is to use an herbicide like Roundup. While conventional farmers often kill their cover crops with herbicide, that method is not appropriate for an organic garden. After the cover crop is terminated, the bed may or may not be ready for planting, depending on the cover crop used and the type of planting that will follow. In the case of rye, as shown in this photo, it will take at least 2 weeks before the bed is ready for transplants and up to 4 weeks before it is ready to be seeded. Because of these difficulties with both termination and the time needed for digestion, I do not recommend rye for the home garden. Buckwheat is at the complete other end of the spectrum, however. It is easy to kill and it digests very quickly. Transplants can be put into a buckwheat bed immediately following termination, and the bed can be seeded about a week after termination. This is a list of cover crops that can work well in the home garden. Now let's dig into some specifics for each of them. Please refer to the handout associated with this video for planting rates for each of these covers. Oats and peas are cool weather cover crops that work best in the spring and fall. They can be grown in the early season before summer crops or in the late season when beds are empty in August or September. They can be grown separately or together and are often grown together so that the peas can climb the oats. These photos show a spring planted crop of oats and peas that was hand pulled to terminate. The above ground plant material was then moved over to a potato bed as mulch. In this situation, it is best to leave as much root as possible in the ground in the original bed. That way, the nitrogen nodules on the pea roots will be available to the next crop, and the plant material that is moved for mulch will be less likely to re-root. Cutting this cover crop down instead of pulling it is a little more work, but it is also a better option when using the tops for mulch. In either case, this bed can be forked and planted the same day with either seeds or transplants. When oats and peas are planted in the late summer or fall to winter kill, the remaining residue in the spring can be used for mulch. Simply pull back the residue to create a transplant hole and then add more mulch after transplanting for full season weed control. The residue can also be removed to another bed as mulch or incorporated into the same bed if you wish to direct seed instead of transplant. Buckwheat is a great summer crop to fill any short niche in the garden plan. It grows quickly and can be terminated very easily. Because it grows so quickly, it is an excellent choice for crowding out weeds. If left to flower, it is also very attractive to many beneficial insects. These photos show how quickly buckwheat will grow. After just 15 days, it has completely filled the bed, making it very difficult for weeds to get a hold. And after 36 days, the crop is in full flower and ready to be terminated. Buckwheat has very succulent stems and it is not especially hardy. There was a rainstorm right after the photo on the right, right before the photo on the right was taken, and you can see how the buckwheat has fallen over. In this case, I terminated it simply by pulling it out of the ground and stacking it on the bed as a winter mulch. In the spring, it was mostly decomposed and the bed was ready for an early spring crop. If buckwheat is left to set seed, it can become a weed, so having a termination plan with this crop is especially important. Cowpeas are a fairly new crop in Wisconsin and have been more commonly grown further south. We are experimenting with them here because as a warm season legume, they fill an important gap in our typical cover crop offerings. They can be grown on their own, but are especially well suited to being grown with grasses, which they will climb. The photo on the lower right shows cowpeas climbing sorghum Sudan grass. When grown later in the season, following a midsummer harvest of onions, garlic, broccoli, or something like that, cowpeas can be left in place to winter kill and form a mulch mat for the following spring. This technique is especially effective when they are grown with a grass that will also winter kill and leave a more durable residue. Sunhep is another newer cover crop for Wisconsin, and it fills that same summer legume niche. Both of these photos show it being grown with other covers. It is combined with cowpeas in the upper left, where it provides some structure for the peas to climb, and with sorghum Sudan grass on the right, where its tall growth habit allows it to hold its own next to that grass. Sun hemp can be left to die over the winter, just as I described with the cowpeas. Because both cowpeas and sun hemp are typically grown in warmer climates, neither can set viable seed in Wisconsin, and both can easily be left to winter kill. Finally, a caution with sun hemp. Though it has the potential to fix a fair bit of nitrogen, I am not planning to use it much in my garden anymore because it turns out it is very attractive to Japanese beetles. You can see them in the photo on the left. Sorghum Sudan grass is one of my favorite cover crops on the farm scale. It is easy to grow and is one of the best choices for suppressing weeds and adding biomass. On the garden scale, it can be challenging, simply because its huge amount of biomass can be difficult to manage with hand tools. I use it in places where I need to kill weeds and improve the soil before installing permanent beds. I will also grow it in combination with cowpeas in beds where I have terminated my third season strawberry plants in July and need to prepare the soil for a vegetable rotation the following season. In this case, I will flatten the crop right before or after frost and leave it in place to winter kill and form an excellent in situ mulch for the following season. Sorghum Sudan grass can also be effective in community gardens or other large projects where thistle or quackgrass need to be beaten back. If that land can be taken out of production for a year or two in order to smother the weeds with this season-long cover, it can be very effective against those weeds. In this case, you would need to use a motorized mower and tiller to seed and manage the cover crop. The photo on the lower right shows sorghum Sudan grass that has been mowed every 3 weeks or so. You can see how the residue forms a mulch to suppress weeds while the grass keeps growing through it. Hairy vetch is my favorite choice for an overwintering cover crop. As a legume, it will fix nitrogen and is very easy to kill in the spring. It is often grown with winter rye, which I do not recommend for the garden scale because rye is so difficult to kill. Vetch, on the other hand, is very easy to handle. You can just fork the whole plant into the bed in the spring and allow a week or two for them to decompose before planting into it. My preferred method, however, is to reserve the above-ground residue for mulch. These photos show ripping the vetch off at the soil level and then spreading it out on the bed to dry. This process will kill the vast majority of the vetch plants. After 1 to 7 days, just roll up the residue and set it aside in order to plant the bed as usual. You can either lightly fork the soil to make sure all the vetch is dead, or you can simply make small holes where you will insert your transplants. The bed on the right has been planted to melons. Finally, replace the vetch residue as mulch for the transplants. That residue will break down quickly, so it is necessary to top off that mulch with straw or hay for full season weed control. These varieties of clover are another choice for a winter hardy leguminous cover crop. Clover works very well on the farm scale. I find it more challenging on the garden scale because, like rye, it can be difficult to kill in the spring. The root masses must be dug and turned under, and because the roots are so dense, it can be heavy work. Still, clover has the potential to fix a great deal of nitrogen and can be very useful in crowding out weeds. These photos show clover that was established under a vegetable crop and left to overwinter. As you can see in the large photo, the spring clover is beautiful and is completely excluding early weeds. In the bottom photo, you can see Brussels sprouts planted into a strip where the clover was killed with tillage. Marsh hay mulch was then used to keep the clover from intruding into the planting strip. When cover crops are used in close proximity to vegetables in this way, the danger is that they will steal nutrients and water from the main crop, much as weeds do. In the trials I have done with this method, vegetable yields were indeed decreased. On the garden scale, clover could be used in paths as a perennial mulch to keep soil in place. Dutch white clover is the best choice for this use because it is fairly tolerant to foot traffic and has a shorter growth habit. Even so, it will need to be mowed regularly. Daikon radish was a very popular farm cover crop for a time and was touted for its biotillage, or its ability to break up hard pans in the soil. Its actual effectiveness as a tiller is still in question and has since decreased in favor. Still, it can be useful as a fast-growing late summer cover that will crowd out weeds and completely decompose before spring. It will leave beds residue-free and marked with pockets where the daikon root has rotted, perfect for early seedlings of spinach or for transplanting onions or lettuce. These photos show a field of daikon radish in the fall, and again after the crop has decomposed in the spring. One caution about using this brassica as a cover crop is that it is susceptible to the same insects and diseases as other brassicas in the garden. If brassicas are an important part of your vegetable planting, I would advise against using this cover crop. If, however, you focus on other edible crop families, this cover can be a nice addition to biodiversity in the garden. Rye is very popular on the farm scale because it can be seeded even into November and will hold soil in place and crowd out weeds until spring planting. As I said earlier, I do not recommend rye for the garden scale because it is difficult to kill. That said, it can be useful when converting new land to garden or as a winter cover to follow sorghum Sudan grass when beating back perennial weeds on larger parcels of land. Having access to mechanical tillage will make managing rye much more feasible. Choosing a cover crop for your specific situation can be somewhat daunting. Going through this list of questions will help. In the end, as long as you know how and when you will terminate the cover to prepare for your next vegetable crop, it will be difficult to make any serious mistakes. These are some possible goals when using cover crops. Holding soil in place is not listed here because that is a minimum requirement for any cover crop, and I just take it as a given. Your goals might vary based on the particular season or even on the specific bed you are working with. Cover crop goals can also change over time. When establishing a new garden, reducing weeds might be a top priority. For a mature garden without much weed pressure, adding nitrogen annually might be the top goal. This particular list shows my priorities for my garden this year. At the bottom, you can see that my overriding goal is to have at least one and whenever possible, multiple cover crops between every vegetable crop. In that way, I am always working on improving the soil and increasing biodiversity in the garden. I have talked about a few specific planting niches throughout this presentation. The best way to identify niches in your garden is to make a planting plan over winter. When you plan ahead, you can see that you might have time to plant a crop of oats and peas in April before your peppers go into the same bed in late May. Or if you really plan ahead, you might have time to plant a crop of sorghum Sudan grass and cowpeas when your onions come out this year, and then leave that dead residue in place in the spring to transplant your kale directly into it the following year. If you write your plan down as shown here, you will have a calendar that reminds you exactly what to do when. You can also use this plan to order all your seeds and have them on hand when needed during the actual growing year. Once your goals are established and you have a planting niche, it is simply a matter of choosing a cover to fit those criteria. You can use the handout that is part of this video to remind you what particular cover crops are good for and when they should be planted. You can also start to experiment with mixes where different species work together to address your various goals. Finally, termination is an essential consideration when choosing a cover crop species. As you know already, it is important to plan how and when you will kill the cover in order to get your main crop in. There is nothing more frustrating when working with cover crops than not being able to get rid of them when the time comes. I have talked about various termination techniques throughout this presentation. One point I have not yet mentioned is that in general the best time to terminate a cover crop is when it is in full flower and before it starts to set seed. It is at that point that the plant will start to become more carbonaceous and less nitrogenous. In order to capture all that nitrogen for the soil, the crop should be killed before it has a chance to move nitrogen into the seeds and mature them into future garden weeds. Of course, you can also kill a cover crop any time before full flower if that is what was required for your garden plan. These photos show various cover crops being terminated or ready to be terminated. I will leave you with these general guidelines for incorporating cover crops into your garden. I especially want to point out the last bullet. As a farmer and gardener, I am strongly motivated by vegetable quality and yield. I know that cover crops are good for the soil. I know they also help to round out my crop rotation and make my garden more diverse and biologically active. But really, mostly, I grow cover crops because they are fun and beautiful and allow me to experiment and grow as a gardener. I hope you have as much fun with them as I do.